I'm Shawn.
And I'm Mike, and you're listening to
Shawn and Mike Take a Hike.
All right, welcome to another episode of Shawn and Mike Take a Hike. What are we going to talk about today, Shawn?
Today, I thought we could talk about fires. What?
The little kid in me wants to do the Beavis.
Yeah, I thought we could talk about fires, like knowing when you can have a fire, what to look for, kind of that whole realm of things. Like, I mean, this is not a how to build a fire episode so much, but like a when can you have a fire, what to look for, how do you know before you go, that sort of stuff.
Right. So just making sure that, again, kind of a theme of like all of our episodes is doing it safely and trying to keep nature intact for the rest of us.
Right.
Type of a thing.
Yeah.
So campfire safety and etiquette, more or less.
Yeah. So you get it. So yeah, I don't really know where to start. Here's the problem with this episode.
Every area is different.
Well, every area is different. So this is, I hate saying this because we say it on every episode, but it's going to be a do your own research type of episode.
We can give some generalities, or if that's a word, some generic information about campfire safety. But when it comes to your location, whether you're on public land, private land, federal land, state land, everything is a little bit different. So
all of that's going to be different. Plus, you're going to have to look out for, like, what is your... I mean, I assume this is nationwide because I'm pretty sure it's Smokey the Bear is nationwide. But, like, what is your fire danger level?
Yeah, what's the DNR danger level?
Yeah, like, what's your drought situation looking like where you're going? What do you got in your area?
Middle of summer in California, probably not the best time to have a forest. Or, it's never a good time to have a forest fire, but never a good time to have a campfire in the middle of a forest.
Exactly, right. Are you, like, winter camping where there's snow on the ground where, like, you could have, I don't want to say darn near as big of a fire as you want, but, like, in the winter you can have a bigger fire than you can have in a dry summer month, Right.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you want to make sure you're not real close to tree limbs, things like that, to where if it does get really high, then you're catching the tree on fire.
Yeah.
Type of a thing. So
let's maybe start with what you and I are more familiar with, which is like if you're going backpacking and you have a specified backcountry campsite that you're going to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually, in our experience at least, those type of campsites, if you are in an area where you are allowed to have a fire, usually those will have either an individual fire ring or possibly a community fire ring if you have multiple sites that are all kind of clustered together.
Right.
If that's what you have, it should be common sense, but in case it's not common sense, you should be having your fire in the fire ring.
Right, and usually if you're in those types of a situation, you're either going into it knowing that there's going to be this situation because you've looked online for that, the campsites, things of that nature. It'll tell you that you have your own fire ring, or if it's community fire ring, and it will state right on those things when you're getting that information, campfires are to be used or had in those specified areas or designated areas only. If you don't like the location of it, don't try to move it, for one.
Yeah. And
also don't, like, if there's a really nice view on the beach or whatever, don't go creating your own little fire pit on the beach or anything like that, because that's another ecosystem or habitat for something else that you could be destroying.
Right. Right. Kind of getting into the leave no trace type thing, where it's like leave nature, And I guess kind of along those lines, maybe worth bringing up, if you are having a fire, burn wood, right? Like don't be burning your trash. Don't be burning, leftover food and all that sort of stuff. We kind of got into that in our what we eat episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you shouldn't be burning your trash. Like the fire pit is for a wood fire.
Right. Well, and that's because if something doesn't completely burn, then it's going to attract, critters. It's going to attract things. And it could end up, if those embers are still hot, could end up hurting those animals or whatever too. So,
realistically, even without that possibility, I don't want to come up to a camp spot with your trash left in the fire pit.
Well, yeah, there is that too.
Like just leave it nice for the next one. Yeah, we for sure have.
So it's always disappointing, when you see that somebody left their junk behind.
Yeah.
And, and I even see, going back to the bear locker thing, we mentioned that there was somebody that left those cans of tuna and stuff in there. Well, those have an expiration date. Yeah, it might be a couple years out, but if nobody takes them, then they're just going to sit there and expire.
I know.
And then it's just waste somewhere. So
I feel like those people that did that were probably had good intentions, or at least I am hoping that they had good intentions, but it's also like, here, I don't want to throw this away. You throw it away. Like, come on.
You throw it away.
You brought it in. Take it out.
Right. You know how much 6 cans of tuna weighs.
Right. So. Exactly. And then the other reason not to burn your trash too is, like, let's keep in mind, some people are trying to cook over that fire, right?
Right. Yep.
So I don't really want to be cooking my food over your trash.
Exactly. Well, and I did mention in an emergency situation on a previous episode that duct tape can be used as a fire starter.
Yeah, but you also said the tiniest little bit.
Tiniest little bit, and in an emergency situation. Right. Don't make that your primary fire starter, because that doesn't burn clean. Some people are trying to cook over it, and they don't need to be taking in all those fumes and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
So that, like I said, that's an emergency survival tip or whatever. If you need a fire and don't have anything else to start it with, but you do have duct tape, it can be used.
Right.
So or Doritos.
Yeah, or Doritos, or crayons, I believe. You can use a crayon instead of I don't know who's taking crayons out on the trail, but maybe if you got kids.
Right.
Theoretically. So if you have a fire ring, use the fire ring, right? I mean, like that's the big takeaway is even if it is a group one, like you and I talked about when we went and had our first group campfire ring experience.
I was not sure I was going to join. I was just like, I'll just stay antisocial. I'll just stay in my site and sit by myself or whatever.
Yep.
And then it ended up being a really good time.
It wound up being a really good time. I think we were both pleasantly surprised.
Oh, yeah. Well, and everybody, so there was a couple of people that showed up and did not bring any firewood and did not make any attempts to go get firewood.
Right.
Don't be those people. If you're going to go enjoy the fire that somebody else either built or has started, if it's not started yet or whatever, be a comrade and go help them gather firewood. And, you'll already make friends if you help out and things like that. So help out, go get some firewood. And then if the fire's already going and you're just walking up to it, bring some firewood with you. Like, go out into the woods, grab some down limbs, drag them up, and say, hey, could we join you?
And I guess maybe that's worth mentioning in this episode, too. Like, I assume this is the rule everywhere. It's certainly the rule everywhere we go. But the rule is don't be cutting trees down to have a fire. I don't know anybody that's taking a chainsaw out into the woods with them anyway, but you're looking for already downed stuff to be having a fire.
I follow a guy on TikTok that is out in Alaska, and he ends up having to cut trees down out in Alaska, but he usually tries to find a dead tree.
Okay.
Or he'll primarily look for stuff on the ground, but he's also digging shelters out of like 8 feet of snow.
Yeah.
So he's doing a whole different type of hiking than we are. So,
but the good thing with going to like one of these spots with a designated fire ring is you really shouldn't have a lot of guesswork on whether you can or cannot have a fire also. Because if you're, I don't want to say all the time, but a lot of the time you're reserving a specific spot, right?
Right.
And there's usually some sort of authority over that campground, whether that be federal government, whether that be your state government, whether that be, you know, whoever it is that's having authority over those groups. They should indicate to you when you're signing up or when you're checking in or any of those, you know, at the trailhead, whether conditions right now as you're starting allow you to have a fire in those pits or not. So there shouldn't be a lot of guesswork there. Like as long as you don't have total blinders on, you should have an indication. Well, A, I'm provided a fire pit, and B, it's not a, you know, fire danger red, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, usually you start making these plans months in advance. Do your best. Just like the weather, you may not have access to internet or any cell signal while you're out on the trail. So check the weather before you go. Make sure it's not going to be too windy or too dry, and check the fire danger in that area where you're going. Don't check for where you live. Check for where you're going because it'll be different.
Yeah, right. So, well, yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, it doesn't even just apply to the backcountry. We went glamping last year, and it was during the drought when Canada was on fire.
Yep.
And where we were going was fire danger red, and they told us, like, yep, there is a fire ring on your site, but we are they were not selling firewood.
Right.
And they said if they saw a fire, they would come put it out.
Right.
So,
well, and then speaking of putting out, excellent segue into, even if you do have a fire, right, have a plan to put it out. So you and I, usually one of the first things we do when we get to camp is we go and get water, you know.
Yep.
We never have a fire. We never have a bonfire, right? We have a fire just big enough for our needs that's not going to get out of control. And then we have a way to put it out. So you got your bag of water there. You get, you know, do you got dirt there that you could throw on it if you need to? You know, all those things. Like, kind of have a plan. Don't let your fire
get
too
a shovel
big.
to throw dirt.
Right.
Yep.
But if it does start to get too big, what do you got to, like you're saying, do you got a shovel to throw some dirt onto it? Do you got your bag of water? Have a plan. Because at the end of the day, I cannot imagine most people plan on starting a fire that spreads, right? But we all know that fires spread. So even with the best of intentions, you still could wind up with a fire that gets a little bit out of your control. Whether maybe you had to walk away for a minute to go get more firewood. Maybe you had to walk away for a minute to go grab something out of your tent. Maybe you had to go use the restroom real quick.
Right.
Be mindful of where your fire is at and what your fire is doing before you go do all that stuff so that it doesn't get out of control while you're gone. But then also have a plan in case, you know?
Yep. Yeah, most people probably are not going to have the ability to find enough wood to have a bonfire.
That is our experience anyway.
On the way to camp, a good half mile from camp, there's plenty of good firewood.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, should we start loading up? But you already got how many pounds on your back? So you're like, no, not yet. There will be firewood when we get there, and then when you get there, there's no firewood.
There's no firewood. There's never any firewood right by the fire pit.
Right.
Unless you happen to, didn't we had that one where we showed up and there was a couple of logs left over that somebody had found that sitting right next to the fire ring. It's like, oh, thank you whoever left these for us.
Right. We had to go find some starter wood and a few extra logs, but it definitely saved us some time and effort.
Right. So that's about all. I mean, do you have anything more for specific fire ring related ones? Because then, if not, we could move on to more of the true quote unquote backcountry camping.
Yeah, the only thing I guess I'll reiterate. I mean, I know we said to use the fire rings because they're provided, but they're also placed strategically in a location that it's safe to have a fire. It's not going to be too close to other trees or things that can
Right.
burn. It's an open area. So that's why they put that there, and that's why they're allowing fires in that specific spot.
Yes.
So definitely use them. They're there for a reason.
Yeah, and
That's
like you said before,
the
don't go moving it just because you think, oh, it would be prettier over here, or
Right.
I'd have a better view of the sky over here. Whatever. The rings are where they're at because that's where they're supposed to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then, all right. So then let's move away from that into that's your like actual camp spot. But as we all
designated camp spots.
yeah, you don't always get that, right? Like sometimes you're just walking along the trail and you got to find a spot to pitch your tent and or hang your hammock or whatever.
We're probably going to experience that for the first time, planning it for the first time this fall.
I was going to say, we kind of did it once already.
Right, but we're going to be planning for it for the first time.
Yeah.
So this is also a learning experience for us. The research that we've done is kind of because of this trip that we're planning for August. So not only when you're finding a location to put your tent to do as little damage to nature, the same goes for your fire pit, where you're going to have a fire. Somebody else might have had the same idea, or you might stumble across and be like, oh, there's a campsite right here that somebody else has used. You can reuse that stuff if it's at a stopping point for you. But make sure you find a location, again, where it's not right next to a tree. It's not going to, if it blazes up too high, there's no low-hanging branches, not a lot of dead, dry grass somewhere that can just spread easily. If you have a shovel, which you should for your cat holes and whatnot anyway, but dig it out a little bit and make sure you've got fresh dirt that you're putting this wood on so that it's not something that's going to catch on fire.
Yeah. So like when we did was it the Manistee River Trail that we were doing that didn't have quote unquote designated camp spots, but then as we were hiking down the trail, you came across spots that like clearly people had used.
Clearly people, we found, I think that was the North Country Trail part of the Manistee River
Loop. Yeah.
The Manistee River Trail, I believe, has designated spots.
Does it? Okay.
I think so, because we've done both.
Right.
One of them has designated spots and the other one doesn't, but it was noticeable that people had camped there.
Right. And the only reason that I bring that up is because like you were just saying a minute ago, like you will come across spots where it's like, okay, clearly we are not the first hikers on this trail. Other people have stopped and used this spot as a camp spot. And, oh, look, here's this little ring of rocks that they have made that clearly they are using for the fire pit.
Right. Or
double check somebody else's work, but...
Right. Or there's this clearing of dirt and there's there's coal or burnt remnants that clearly somebody has had a fire and the whole forest didn't burn down.
Yeah.
So a safe-ish spot. Definitely make sure, but...
Well, and not only just a safe-ish spot, but also like, okay, if somebody else or multiple people before you have designated this as the fire spot, well, don't go making another one. Like, go back to your leave no trace, as little impact as possible, right? Like, okay, we've all collectively agreed this is where the fire is going to be at this little spot. So continue using that so that you're not making another pit right next, 10 feet away from it and causing more damage to the land that surrounds it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Definitely reuse, repurpose.
Yeah.
Type of a thing.
And then again, don't be having a giant bonfire. Have not just like a sufficiently sized fire, but the smallest fire that you can get away with. I think is really the best way to frame it in your head.
Right. If it's in the colder months, like when we go in the earlier months of summer or late spring, or in the late summer, early fall, when it's starting to chill down at night, we might have a little bit bigger of a fire just to add that warmth.
Right.
The fires that we have in the summer, it's just relaxing. We're
Mm-hmm.
there, we're sipping on our pints and sipping some water, relaxing because we just hiked 7-8 miles. It's more or less for the ambiance than the actual heat at that point. And so just we're just having a little fire for the light when it's dark outside. So
Right.
it's not a survival tool when it's in that type of situation. If you are having a fire to survive, then if people are searching for you, then maybe have a big fire.
Have the
But
smallest fire for your need. So like if you're
there you
having a
go. Yeah.
fire to be spotted from rescue planes, okay, have
Or
an
the
appropriately
International
sized
Space
fire.
Station. Right.
You know, but yeah, have the smallest one for your need. But then the other
Yeah.
thing
Don't go
that I
all
want,
pyrotechnic and
yeah. Well, the other thing that I want to say before I forget, because I'm going to forget if I don't say it, but like,
yep.
so you and I have said before, we quite often go on the North Country Trail.
Right.
The North Country Trail does go on private property too. So
I believe you have. Don't you have a coworker? Or you had a
yeah,
coworker
yeah, I have a
that it
coworker
ran
that
through his
goes through his
property.
property.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're on. That's another thing to kind of like plan ahead a little bit. I know you're not necessarily going to know exactly where you're at on the map, but like, no,
Right.
are you potentially going to be on private property? Are you definitely going to be only on public property? But if you're on
Right.
private property, well, then all the more reason to least impact. You know, these people are letting us on their property really out of the kindness of their hearts, right?
Right.
Don't fucking ruin it.
Nobody's got. Yeah. Nobody's got to let us on their land.
Right.
They could ask the North Country Trail Association to move that trail
Right.
so it goes around their property. It's nice that they don't in most cases. Some have, and that's why sometimes it ends up going along a road
Yep.
or something because somebody owns that land and they didn't want it there, so
Right.
they don't own the road, so they just moved it to the road. So,
I mean, I've even
but
seen things in some spots where it's like if you let's say you're going to be mostly on private property for like a good chunk of it. Like I've seen things where they're like, really the only way you can have a fire is if you get landowner permission. Which
right,
I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure how you would even go about getting landowner permission.
right.
But
Unless they put a cell phone number or phone
yeah,
number somewhere,
right.
right.
But I mean, just I guess think about it. It's something to think about before you have a fire. Don't just assume you're out
Yeah.
on the trail and you can have a fire.
A lot of the information we are going to provide, and the theme of it is going to be a know before you go.
Yeah.
With where you can have a fire, what kind of land you're going to be on.
Yep.
Like just like before you go backpacking anyway, know what the temperatures are going to be. Do you need long pants? Do you need short pants?
Yep.
Like it's same thing. You've got to be prepared for the situation that you're putting yourself into.
Well, and we kind of touched on this part earlier too about the trash in the fire pit, but like if you need, let's pretend this is not necessarily fire related, but it is fire related. If the food you're taking requires you to heat it up, boil water, whatever,
Yeah.
you definitely are going to want to know, are you allowed to have a fire? And if you're not allowed to have a fire and that's what you were planning on, well, then what are you going to do? Are you going to bring some sort of little cook stove? Are you going to take different food that doesn't require being heated? Like,
right.
Figure out your game plan for that too.
Right. I mean, realistically, I always recommend taking at least the smallest of cook stoves and smallest canister of gas just in case, because you might find yourself in a torrential downpour and you can, set up in your little vestibule and stay a little safe and still be able to cook if you're starving.
Yeah.
But you won't be able to cook over a fire pit.
Well, or what if there is no wood?
Well, true.
You mentioned a little bit ago, sometimes get to camp and the closest wood that you have found that is down and dead that you're allowed to use is a half mile.
Rotted or wet.
Yeah. Right. Or that's okay. Let's say you do find wood and it is rotted and wet. You can't get it started. I mean, what are you going to do? So you should have, something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know of a different way to say that, but like we take a camp stove. So like we don't
Right.
rely on having a fire
Right.
at camp to heat up our water. And realistically, if we had one day where I couldn't heat up my dinner, like I could eat trail mix for dinner. I could eat my granola bar for dinner. If I had to skip a meal,
Yeah.
I'm not going to starve to death, you know?
Well, yeah, there's times where I tell you you have to eat your dinner even though you don't want to,
Yeah.
because you need to put something back in your body. You burned a ton of calories, and you have to eat. You cannot just malnourish yourself. You're
I'm too
dehydrated and then
tired.
you're
I'm too
starving.
tired to eat dinner.
Right. So, but yeah, have your plans with that. Make sure that you know where you're at and what type of land you're on. Don't impact the area too much if you can help it. Yeah, I really don't have a whole lot. I did read, I guess the one thing is they do recommend, just like your cat holes and whatnot, try to be at least 200 feet away from any kind of streams or lakes or anything like that.
Even with your fire?
And yeah, it's what I was reading. I know some designated camp rings that we've had. Well, no, I guess even at Bowman Lake, we could see the lake pretty good, but it was probably 200 feet. So, and maybe that's just to preserve, like, if people want to fish or anything like that too. But definitely, set your if you're making your own fire place to have a fire, just do it wisely. Don't try to impact too much.
Yeah. And then, so I guess the only other thing that I really wanted to maybe just touch on, we briefly touched on it before, but like, we glamp a lot, right? When you're glamping at a state park with one of these giant fire rings, you gotta like mostly put out your fire before bed, but let's be honest, everybody kind of just lets things go. There's enough
Yeah.
people around. There's emergency services if things got out of control. You can't necessarily rely on that when you're in the backcountry. So just as a maybe, let's touch on what is the proper way to put out a fire or make sure that it's out before you're done with it. My personal favorite is I like to use water. I mean, it makes a fun sound. It's very visual.
That's not where I thought you were going.
What did you think I was going to say?
I thought you were going to say my personal favorite is to pee on it.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. That's a good. I didn't even think of that as an option. Okay, so I'm gathering that's your go-to.
Well, that's my go-to if I know nobody's going to be cooking on it.
But yeah, I mean, so your options are kind of basically pour water on it, make sure your coals are going out.
Yep.
The other one is, we've kind of mentioned this one before, you can throw some dirt on it. Really,
Yep.
to throw dirt on it for that one to work, in my experience anyway, you kind of need to spread the fire out nice and good before you do that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yep.
So that's the big thing is...
Well, I mean, in general, though, even with water, you want to make sure it's spread out, just in the off chance that two pieces didn't get all that wet. And because you're in the backcountry, you don't have all the water in the world. So you still want to spread it out, so if there's a couple of hot coals that are still there, they don't reignite.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
So
really get it spread out, plan ahead. Like, don't wait until the last minute to put your fire out, like.
Right. Don't put a new log on and be like, well, time to go to bed.
Exactly. Right. Or, don't just like throw a cup of water on it and walk away. Like, make sure that your fire is really going out. Like you're saying, make sure there's no stray hot spots in the fire pit.
Yep.
Get it good and spread out, get some dirt thrown on it, make some mud, like use your shovel, get some water in there, make mud, kind of turn it over, make sure it's all good and doused.
It will dry for the next person. And the dirt can be a pain in the butt for the next person, but they know you're doing things safely. So nobody's going to be real upset with you, and you'll probably never beat them. So,
yeah. So, get it put out, kind of keep an eye on it for a little bit at least. Make sure that it's not going to flare back up, or,
Right.
watch for smoke and all that sort of stuff, and make sure nothing around the fire pit is catching on fire. But I mean, I thought maybe it would be worth mentioning all that in case people don't actually know how to put a fire out.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I guess we can touch a little bit on, like, we do take the fire starters.
Yep.
We don't use a full fire starter. I mean, 90% of the time, you can buy a box of those. What are they? The Duraflame, whatever.
I don't know. I always watch for them to go on clearance at the end of the season and just buy a pack of them.
Yeah, but you can break them things in half or in thirds, and they're gonna do the job. Yeah. You can extend the life of those boxes, and those, so that's what we do is we break them into thirds or halves or whatever, and take a few. We make sure we have at least one per night, and we get a fire going that way. That way it's I think those things are mostly
I think they're sawdust and
wax or glue or something.
I guess I don't really know what's in them. I know there's sawdust in them, but I don't know what else is in them.
So, but they hold on for a while, long enough to get your kindling going, and then you can build it up that way. So if you're not familiar with how to start a fire or how to make a fire, build one, that's another thing to research.
Yeah, probably not best to do that for the first time.
In the backcountry, yeah.
I guess I just take for granted that people know how to start a fire, because, like, you and I have been building fires for years and years and years, but there might be people that don't know how to start.
I'm a big fan of the log cabin or the lean-to method, but
and he is awful at starting fires. The right way to do it is the teepee method.
No. The right way to do any fire is to make sure that your fire starter can catch the kindling. It's not the big stuff on the bottom, the little stuff on top. It's the little stuff on bottom, the big stuff on top, with enough oxygen to get in there so that the little stuff can catch fire and then catch the big stuff on fire. Because fire burns up.
And I would caution you against saying big stuff. The bigger stuff.
Right, yeah. The bigger stuff.
It's a progression, right? Yeah. Don't wait until you're out in the backcountry to start your first fire. Practice at least once before you go.
At least, yeah. With the method you're planning on using in the backcountry, if you're not familiar with it. Because, I mean, it will be a bummer if it's not a survival thing, but you were looking forward to having a fire and relaxing that night, and then you can't get one lit. It's going to be stressful, and it's going to be a big bummer. Yep. So make sure you can do that.
Well, and maybe plan your trip too. This isn't necessarily fire related, but if you're planning on having a fire, maybe try to get to camp before it gets dark out too. Don't push your mileage so far that you're not going to be able to gather wood or get something started or get your stuff set up. I mean, look, I understand that there's people out there that set their camp up by headlamp, and that is fine if you are comfortable doing that. If you are a beginner,
that's just asking for mosquitoes or whatever to enter your tent.
I mean, I just feel like it's asking for a lot of things. Like, I mean, I don't want to be getting this camp that late. I don't want to be doing everything in the dark. I don't want, I want a little minute to relax before I got to turn in for the night.
We usually plan our days to where we know approximately how far we're going for the day, and we know approximately how fast we hike. Yeah. So we know when we need to leave camp by to get to the new camp at an approximate hour. So we know how much daylight we've got left in the day. So we know that, okay, like the one day we got to camp like at 1 or 2 p.m. and we went and sat on the beach for a while. Like, we happened to be at Lake Spirit.
That was our short day, though, because
and it was a planned day.
Yeah, it was planned just because to get the next couple of days where we wanted them to be, we knew we were going to have a short day. But I mean, I didn't hate that day. I'll tell you that. I mean, it was pretty nice.
Right. So make sure, especially if it's your first time building a fire, do that before it gets dark. Get your fire built, and then that way you can just sit and relax when it gets dark. You'll still have to use a headlamp or a flashlight or whatever your source of light is to get to your tent from the fire pit when you're going to bed for the night.
Yeah.
But it's always nice to have that started before it's dark, just so you've got that peace of mind
For
that
sure.
it's going.
Yeah,
So,
for sure. So,
yep.
that is realistically, Mike, that is pretty much all of the notes of all the things that I had to talk about. I mean, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you feel like we should? Fire's fire, right? So there's not
Fire is
a
fire.
heck of a lot to say about it, but the big takeaway, I mean, not to get into our like recap,
Right.
whatever, but unfortunately, do your own research.
Do your own research.
that's the takeaway is every spot is going to be like you could be. So we've said before, we're in Michigan. It's going to be different in the UP than it is down in the Thumb. And the Thumb is going to be different than it is over on the west side of the state. Like you could have drastically different fire rules. You might be on federal land up in the UP, and you might be on state land over on the west side of the state, and you might be on private property over on the Thumb.
Yep.
All of those are going to have different rules. They're all going to have different fire danger risks. And that's all just within one state.
Yeah.
So, who knows where listener is listening from? It's going to be that much different where you're at, month to month, season to season, location to location. You're kind of going to have to look up and see, where am I going? What am I allowed to do? Do I need permission to do any of this?
Yeah, I mean, it just falls into the know before you go. Do your research, look into it. You shouldn't be, as an inexperienced amateur hiker, just waking up in the morning and be like, yep, I'm going to go backpacking today, and just pack your pack and start driving to get to the trail.
Yeah, don't be Forrest Gumping it. Don't just be like, don't just start walking and keep walking, right? Like, I mean, kind of have a plan.
yeah, have a plan, know before you go, and you'll be fine. And as you get more experienced, sure.
Right.
But as you're more experienced, if you do decide that you're going to just go hiking for the day or hiking for a weekend or whatever, you're probably going to a location that you've already been to and you already know the rules. So.
Right. Or at least you're familiar with looking up, where you're going and what the rules are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Because that's a big learning curve too, and we are going to have a whole episode just on that. But like figuring out the planning thing, like we had a listener write in and say, like, okay, this is all well and good, but like, how do I know where to go? Like, how do you even get started with the planning? So we're going to add an episode in with what our process is on doing that. So we'll get into that more in that episode, but that's part of it, is kind of figuring out like where you're going to be, who owns that land, what are the rules. Well, like that's a whole thing all to itself.
And that's when we went to the Pictured Rocks. Well, our first trip in the Porkies, we didn't really know a whole lot about the fire situation. We knew that we had fire pits on our sites. Yep. When we went to the Pictured Rocks, there are areas where it says no fire.
Oh, yeah.
There are areas where it says there's no water source.
Yeah.
So you have to either find a water source and bring it with you, or you have to go set up camp and then go find a water source.
Yeah.
So there's a whole different situation with that too, but the sites we use and where we're comfortable with going, it will tell you, well, that's a federal park or a national park or whatever.
That's National Lakeshore.
Right. So that was on the national or the federal site.
Yeah, right on the brochure, like, which was nice.
But it basically just said there's no fires here. So, so we planned around that. We knew we wanted to have a fire.
Yeah.
And so we planned around that, and we may have hiked a little bit farther one day, or there was that one day where it was a shortened day, but we could have gone a little bit farther, but then we couldn't have had a fire.
That was the thing. That's why we shortened it up, is because the options were, well, you could keep going, but then the next spot there's no water, and then the next spot there's no fire, and then and then you're like a whole another day's worth. So I mean, but that's a whole different thing. We'll get into that in a different episode. But I mean, just
one of the reasons that there could have been no fires allowed was just that it was too much forest, too much wood. Like there was just no clearings or anything. There was clearings enough for you to set up your tent, but not enough for it to be safe to have a fire or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I don't know why either. I mean, I didn't really look into why you couldn't have a fire there. I just know
Right.
it said you couldn't have a fire, so we didn't have a fire. Or we didn't stay at that
we
one.
we didn't stay there. Yeah. So, but that like I said, you're going to want to plan these things out. So that, I guess that was a long way of saying that. Just you're going to be planning this out, and where you're planning this out should tell you, unless you know you're going to be doing dispersed camping, then you definitely need to look into what type of land you're dispersed camping on and what those rules and regulations are.
Right.
So
yeah, I think that's a fair way to say that.
Yep. That's all I have. That's I've got nothing else. As always, we're at Shawn and Mike Hike on all the socials. I still haven't gotten the Snapchat up and running. Had a crazy couple of weeks, but we do have all the other socials, and at ShawnMikeHike@gmail.com to reach us on the emails.
Yep.
And like, rate, review, subscribe. Wherever you listen to this, definitely helps us boost. Tell a friend, share it with a friend, or make fun of it with a friend, whatever. We're happy either way. So we just enjoy doing this. So that's all I've got.
Yeah, that's all I got. Go take a hike, Mike.
Okay. Yep, go take a hike. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
We'll see you guys.